when some years ago, not too long ago, back during the time in which Benedict XVI was reigning as the Pope of the Catholic Church, the great pontiff, he was asked by a journalist. He was a friendly journalist, someone who wasn't trying to trap him, but who asked a question that he knew was on the lips and in the minds of so many in the church and even outside of the church. He asked the Pope this question: how many paths are there to God? Now now that you heard the question, you can see kind of what the journalist was after, because he knows that maybe one of the things that almost everyone, seemingly sometimes everyone, claims to know is that there are many paths to God. And what people mean by this is, in some sense, that all religions and all philosophies lead in the same direction towards God, towards salvation, towards the truth. And even though there may be apparent disagreements or different ways of thinking and speaking, and even if we have in ourselves harmonized them all so that they still seem very different from one another, we should believe and we should be confident that all of these paths lead to God. And furthermore, it's not just the many religions and many philosophical systems around the world that are practiced, but also anyone's own individual idea about who God is, what he wants from us, and how it is that we should best honor him, and how we best should move forward with whether there's an afterlife and how we please God and live according to God in the world. All of these are valid. So many people take such a view that it seems like something that's not even up for debate, you know. Oh, everyone knows that all paths lead to one. So that's what's behind the question. And I had to do all that setup here because the Pope gave an answer which I thought, and still think, is one of the most brilliant answers to a difficult and vexing question, and an answer that was just like a good rabbi might give, and just like the sort that Jesus might give had he been asked the question in our time. And I thought to myself, you know, sometimes that's what a pope is for, to answer a question for the church in such a way that speaks the truth and at the same time avoids the trap that's being set for the church. So with all that great buildup, here we go. Here's what he said. He said, as an answer to the question, how many paths are there to God? He said, as many as there are people. I hope you can start to already get a little bit of a hint as to why that answer is so brilliant. Here is my take on why. The Pope knows very well that people today, even many Catholics today, feel that it's bad form to claim that the Catholic Church is the one true representative of Christianity, and that Christianity is the one true religion in the world. The people think this is bad form. Some people, of course, a lot of people think it's not just true, right? If they all subscribe to the many paths theory. But then others who, even in some sense, are loyal Christians or loyal Catholics, they don't want to say this in public. They're afraid that it's bad form to say it, first of all, because they're afraid out of a kind of a religious politeness, or they don't want to offend non-Christians or non-Catholics, as if to say that this is the true path and the only true path is to tell someone else that their religion is wrong, which by inference means bad, and which by another inference might mean, and that means you're a bad person, or maybe a deceived or dumb person. And we don't want to do that. And one of the reasons we don't want to do that is we know there's been a lot of religious violence in our history. And it seems to us, it certainly seems to us, historians argue about this, but it certainly seems to us, to a lot of people, to many, maybe even most, that there has been a lot of violence in the history of the human race, and even in our recent history, that was based on religion, fighting about religion, and that maybe the big problem all along has been, if every religion thinks it's the one true path, then it must look upon all other religions as threats, and maybe even threats to be destroyed. And everyone, of course, thinks their religion is the best, and so you get all these religions, and you see what I'm saying? And so the thing to do would be to try to convince ourselves and everyone, all religions lead to one, and if we can convince ourselves of this and convince everyone of this, then we might have found the key to world peace. There's a famous piece of art. It was actually a piece of graffiti. As far as I know, the original place, the coexist, you've seen that, where all the letters of the coexist, the word coexist in English, are written in such a way as to be symbolic of different world religions. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, maybe Buddhism, Hinduism. And I've seen the original piece of graffiti on a wall in Prague. I actually had my picture taken with it once, years and years ago. And this idea that, hey, look, we all have to have peace in the world. And the way to do this, maybe the real way to do this, is for us to admit that each religion in its own way is perfectly valid. And so when you ask that question of a religious leader, especially one so famous as the Pope, you realize, hey, I'm setting a trap for him. You remember how the Pharisees used to set traps for Jesus? They figured he's got to answer either one way or another, but either way he answers is going to be trouble for him, right? The rendering taxes to Caesar question was like that. If he says that we should pay taxes to Caesar, that means he's a traitor to the Jews. If he says that we shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar, that means that he's an insurrectionist against the Romans. Either way, we're going to have him in our control. And Jesus got out of that question by getting to the deeper truth of things. Give Caesar what belongs to him. His name's on the coin, give it to him. Give to God what is God's. And this question confounded those who sought to trap him. That's exactly what the answer that Pope Benedict XVI does. It confounds those who seek to trap him and to say either, well, if you answer, of course, the Christian religion is the only path, and of course the Catholic Church is the only true expression of Christianity, the only valid one, then we've got him. He's a religious bigot. And if he says, no, it's true, all paths lead to one, then he's a heretic within his own church. Because the Catholic Church teaches that Christ is the only way to God, and that the Church, the Catholic Church, in communion with the Bishop of Rome, is the true expression of the Church of Christ. And so when the Pope made this answer, he confounds either side of the trap. And on one hand, he does affirm, yes, there are many paths, but these paths are not fundamentally represented by the many religions. The many paths part of the answer is represented by the individual history of every human heart that it has before God. That God sees each one of us, has made each one of us personally, and upholds each one of us in being by his love, by his knowledge, and is drawing each one of us within our own unique personal history to himself, so that considered as each as individuals, we're all on our own path with God. And all of the history that is a part of our lives, everything that we do and say and think and experience and go through, can become a part of our history of salvation, of the history of God's work in this world. At the same time, the Pope's answer leaves open the question of the issue of religions. But there's a hint that he gives about it. The hint that he gives is, it's not merely that there must be one religion which has all of the truth, and that there must then means that all of the others are simply false. Rather, it must mean this, and we can find this in the Catechism, that every genuine search for God, for the revelation of God, every person who honestly before God, in his own way, says, as it were, to God, "Make yourself known to me so that I can follow you." Whether that be in the tradition of Judaism or Islam or any other tradition, that it's possible for anyone who is seeking God and who has found themselves in a human tradition to find God speaking to him there in some way or another. The Catholic Church itself teaches this, that our hearts were made for God and to hear divine communication. There's a whole theology of ways in which the various religions can be related to God and to Christianity. And yet we know that the Catholic Church does teach that this religion we call Christianity and that this church we call Catholic has, if you will, we might say a privileged position with respect to the revelation of God. That this church represents Christ himself when he says, "Those who would enter the sheepfold must come through the gate." And he makes himself identical with the gate. The question is, what is it that the church has? And how are we who are members of it to understand this? We must understand this neither with indifference, right? Neither with an attitude that says, well, I'm a Catholic and that's just the way I was brought up, and I like to follow Catholicism. I think this is a true way to God. But it's no more or less true than any other religion at the end of the day. That's indifference to what we've been given as Christians in the church. But then on the other hand, there's another attitude that we have to avoid. We have to avoid what one great American Catholic writer called the great sin of Catholics, smugness about their own religion, as if, because I am a member of this privileged body of those who bear the knowledge of God in an ultimate way, that this somehow has to do with my own achievement. It's because I'm smarter, or it's because I'm morally superior to everyone. And this is false as well. If we are Christians, if we are members of the church, it's because God has made us so. And we have only to be thankful to him for this. And then we have to remember that God has made us members of this church, members of Christ's body, so that we can then repeat the mission of Christ in the world, which means to offer ourselves in suffering for love for the world the way he did. You might ask then, who is Christ referring to when he talks about the robbers and the thieves? Well, it says right in the gospel, of course, the Pharisees. He's talking about the Pharisees. But who were they? They were supposed to be the teachers of Israel. They were the ones who were educated in the knowledge of the prophetic tradition and in the Torah. They were the ones who, if anyone was prepared to recognize the Messiah, it should have been them. And yet, almost to a man, with a couple of exceptions that we know about, almost all of them were not only blind to the coming of the Messiah, they hated him when he showed up. And these are the ones whom Jesus calls thieves and robbers. They are members of this privileged religion only for their own benefit, temporarily, only seeking power. They're not actually interested in God. They could care less what the teachings of Abraham and Moses and all of the patriarchs really mean. They could care less what the meaning is of all of the messianic prophecies of the prophetic tradition. What they're interested in is power and self-aggrandizement and prestige. And they see that this rabbi represents something else, that he's winning the hearts of those simple people who are still on the lookout for God in their own religion. So here's something we want to close with. First of all, let's ask ourselves, which are we? Are we the Pharisees, if you will, those who take great pride in having the right religion and then just want to use it to subjugate other people in one way or another, either within our own church or outside? Or are we those whose hearts are really after God and open to God, such that we are preparing ourselves to recognize the voice and the message of God when he sends it? And then, second of all, assuming that fundamentally we are of that second good category, are we keeping up, if you will, our religious discipline? A discipline of heart and mind, of life, and of knowledge of our faith, so that we're capable of recognizing the authentic message of God when it comes. This message is, of course, delivered in weak human vessels. The Jesus Christ didn't say, I'm going to hang around for another 2,000 years and keep walking the earth to make sure that the gospel gets spread. When he left his work in the charge of weak men. But he did leave them with his power, with his truth. Are we capable still of recognizing the authentic teaching of those who teach authentically, not of their own ideas, not their own particular agenda, but simply those who point us to the gate, to the true shepherd? If our hearts are really continually open and disciplined and waiting for the message of God, we'll recognize the true teachers of the gospel. We'll recognize the true shepherds. And what's more, we'll even be able to recognize elements of the truth that live outside of our church, that live even outside of the Christian faith altogether. That way we can be emissaries of the truth of Christ, of peace and of reconciliation. That's the sort of Catholic I want to be, both as a preacher and a priest in my parish and as a man out in the world. And that's what we all must be after.